The morning I drove out to the Callaway property, I had a clipboard, a file folder, and exactly zero interest in anything complicated. My name is Daniel Marsh. I was 36, a field recovery agent for a regional lending firm, which is the kind of job title that sounds cleaner than it is. What it meant in practice was this: when someone stopped paying, I showed up. Not to threaten anyone, not to drag things out of yards, just to talk. To make one final, personal attempt at resolution before the lawyers got involved and everything became expensive for everybody. I had been doing it for 4 years. I was good at it because I was patient, because I didn't enjoy conflict, and because I had learned early that most people in debt weren't criminals. They were just people who had made a plan that stopped working and didn't know how to say so out loud. The Callaway account had been sitting on my desk for 6 weeks. Marcus Callaway, age 44. Equipment loan on a tractor and a secondary irrigation system. 18 months of mostly on-time payments, then 3 months of silence. No returned calls, no response to mailed notices. One voicemail from a neighbor asking us to stop leaving messages because Marcus had apparently been forwarding his calls. The file had a note at the top from my supervisor that said, simply, sensitive, handle personally. I had asked what sensitive meant. She had said, just drive out there, Daniel. So I drove. The property was about 40 minutes outside of town on a 2-lane road that got narrower and more serious the farther you went. Flat land giving way to gentle hills, then a long gravel drive flanked by split-rail fencing that needed attention in a few places, but had clearly been somebody's pride at some point. The kind of farm that looked like it had been carefully built over decades, then left to catch its breath. I parked near the front of the house and sat for a second. The main farmhouse was old but solid. White paint gone slightly cream with weather, a wide porch with 2 chairs and a small table between them. There were flowers along the front walk that had been recently watered. Wind chimes made of bent spoons and copper wire hung near the door, moving in a slow, easy way that made the whole place feel more alive than the silence suggested. No truck in the drive. I got out, walked to the porch, and knocked. For a moment, nothing, then footsteps. The sound of someone moving with intention, not hurrying but not drifting either. The door opened. The woman standing there was not who I expected. That was the first problem. I had been expecting someone older, maybe, someone tired, the kind of person who opened doors in the middle of a Tuesday looking like they had already braced for bad news. Instead, she was somewhere in her late 30s, with dark brown hair pulled back in a loose braid that had given up on itself somewhere around mid-morning, wearing a faded green work shirt tucked into jeans, one cuff rolled to the elbow, the other not. Her hands had soil on them. She had been doing something outside before I arrived. She looked at me with the kind of patience that comes not from indifference but from having dealt with enough surprises to have stopped flinching at new ones. Her eyes were the kind of gray-green that changes color depending on what's behind you. I noticed that because I am apparently a person who notices things he shouldn't when he is supposed to be working. Mrs. Callaway, I said. Nora, she said, not as a correction exactly, just as information. I'm Daniel Marsh. I'm a field agent with Lakeview Lending. I said it the way I always said it, steady, not apologetic, not aggressive. I'm here regarding your husband's equipment loan account. I've been trying to reach him for several weeks. Something moved across her face, not surprise, not embarrassment, something quieter than both of those. She looked at the clipboard in my hand, then back at me and said, "You'd better come in." That was the second problem. In 4 years of field recovery work, I had been turned away from doors, had paperwork thrown at me, had one man release a dog that was mostly bark and no actual ambition. I had never once been invited inside on the first sentence. I followed her through the front door. The house was clean in the real way, not the company's coming way. The kitchen table had a half-finished cup of tea and an open book turned face down on it, which told me she had been in the middle of something and had not run to tidy up when she heard my knock. There were dried herbs hanging near the window. A child's drawing on the refrigerator held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, the kind of home that has been lived in long enough to have a personality of its own. Nora gestured to the chair across from hers. I sat. She sat. She wrapped both hands around her tea mug like she needed the warmth even though it wasn't cold. Then she said, "Marcus left 7 weeks ago." I kept my face steady. "Left? Yes." She looked at the table, then back up at me. "He took the truck, about $4,000 from our joint account, and a duffel bag. I got a text 2 days later that said he needed time and he was sorry." She paused. "That was the last I heard from him." I set my clipboard on my knee without opening it. This was the thing they never prepared you for in field work, not the anger, not the locked gates. The moments when the story behind the account turned out to be something that had nothing to do with money at all. "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded once, accepted, not moved by it. "Do you have children?" I asked, even though I already knew. The drawing was right there on the refrigerator. "One, Ellie, she's 8. Nora took a sip of tea. "She's at school right now. I try to keep things normal while she's there." I looked at the file in my hands and felt a specific kind of uselessness that 4 years of this job had not quite managed to make comfortable. The loan was for $24,000. The remaining balance was just under $19,000, 3 missed payments. The tractor and irrigation equipment were secured assets, which meant the company had a legal path to recover them if the account wasn't resolved. Which meant the woman sitting across from me, who was already holding together a farm and a child by herself, could lose the equipment she needed to keep the farm running in the first place. That was the situation. I looked at her. "Has anyone from the company explained to you what the options are?" "No one has called me," she said. "The letters came for Marcus. I opened them." She looked at me directly. "I know what the account balance is. I know what the tractor is worth. I've been trying to figure out whether I can refinance the loan in my name since the second week he was gone." A small pause. "The bank said they'd need a cosigner." "I don't have one." I looked at her for a second. "Have you spoken with an attorney?" "I have a meeting next Thursday." She held my gaze. "I'm not helpless, Mr. Marsh. I'm just behind." That sentence landed somewhere. I didn't examine where exactly. "I can see that," I said. She looked at the clipboard again. "So what happens now on your end?" I told her the truth, which was that I didn't know yet. That I needed to make a call to my supervisor before anything was decided. That I had not driven out here to take the tractor. That I had driven out here to understand the situation, and now I understood it better than I had an hour ago. I told her that the company had some options that didn't always make it into the letters, and that I would find out exactly what those options were and come back with a real answer instead of a vague one. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to believe that. I would have done the same. Then she said something I did not expect. "Have you had lunch?" I stared at her. "I'm sorry, lunch." She nodded toward the stove behind her. "I made soup this morning. There's too much of it. You look like you've been driving since early and it's almost noon." She said it the way she said everything else, matter of fact, not performing kindness, just offering it because it seemed like the reasonable thing to do. "You can make your call from the porch if you need privacy, and then you can tell me what the real options are over soup." I should have said no. That was clearly the professional answer. Agents didn't have lunch with clients, especially not clients whose files said sensitive at the top. Especially not clients who looked at you with gray-green eyes and talked about their missing husbands with the quiet steadiness of someone who had already decided they were going to survive it. I said, "That sounds good." The porch was bright and still. I called my supervisor, Sandra, who had been in this business for 20 years and had the patient voice of someone who had stopped being surprised by any variation of the human story. I told her the situation, all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's your read on her?" "She's not hiding from it," I said. "She's actively trying to fix it. The husband is the one who walked. She's the one who opened the letters." Another pause. "The equipment's in good condition. It's on a working farm that looks well maintained. From what I can see, yes." "There's a hardship deferral option," Sandra said. 2 months, no penalty, payment reduction on month 3 and 4. We'd need documentation, proof of income, confirmation of legal separation or abandonment. "It's not automatic, but I can flag this file and push it to the review team today if you think it's worth pursuing." "I do," I said. "You like her." "Sandra, I'm not accusing you of anything, Daniel. I'm noting it because it sometimes affects people's judgment and I'd like you to be aware." I leaned against the porch railing and looked out at the fence line in the distance. "She made soup," I said. "She has a kid. She met me at the door with dirt on her hands because she had been working. She's trying." "That's all true," Sandra said. "Also, none of that answers what I said." I didn't answer what she said. She approved the deferral flag anyway. Nora had set 2 bowls on the kitchen table by the time I came back inside. Vegetable soup with a rich, dark broth and thick bread on the side. A glass of water next to mine. She had washed her hands and repinned the part of her braid that had come loose and then apparently decided that was enough effort for lunch with a lending agent. I sat down and told her what Sandra had approved. As I explained the deferral option, the documentation they'd need, the timeline, she listened without interrupting. Her hands stayed flat on the table on either side of her bowl. When I finished, she asked two precise questions about the income documentation and one about whether the deferral would affect her ability to later refinance the loan under her name. Both were good questions. The second one was a question I had not thought to ask Sandra, which meant I had to write it down and promise to find out. She nodded. "Thank you, don't thank me yet. It's not approved, it's just flagged for review." "I know," she picked up her spoon. "But you drove out here and you're telling me there are options instead of a tow truck in my driveway, so..." She left the sentence there. I ate the soup. It was very good, which I told her, and she said the secret was roasting the tomatoes first, which she said in the way of someone sharing a small, ordinary truth rather than a recipe tip. We talked, not about the account at first. About the farm. She had inherited it from her parents, who had run it as a vegetable operation before converting part of the land to grain. She and Marcus had worked it together for 12 years. In the last 3, the margins had gotten worse and he had gotten quieter. She said it without drama, just as fact. "Did you know it was coming?" I asked. She stirred her soup. "I knew something was." She looked up. "I didn't know it would be this specific thing. You don't usually see the exact shape of it, do you? You just feel the weather changing." I thought about a relationship I had ended 2 years before. A woman named Caroline who had stopped reaching for my hand in small, slow ways over the course of about 6 months, until one day I realized she had been saying goodbye for half a year without a word of it spoken out loud. "No," I said, "you usually don't." Nora looked at me for a moment, then she said, "You're not what I was expecting." "What were you expecting?" "Someone who wanted to make this faster and easier for himself." She said it without accusation. "Someone who would look at the situation, feel bad about it for 30 seconds, and then do whatever the clipboard said." "The clipboard doesn't actually say anything yet," she smiled. It was the first real smile since I had sat down. Small, quick, honest, the kind that wasn't performed for anyone. After lunch, she walked me out, not because she had to. It just seemed like the natural end of things, both of us moving toward the door at the same time and then out onto the porch and then down the steps toward the gravel. The wind chimes moved. I looked back at them. "The spoons," I said, "Ellie made them." Nora's voice softened just slightly. "She got very into repurposing things for about 2 months last winter. We had a phase." "Did it end?" She moved on to bird feeders made of toilet paper rolls. She paused. "The birds were less impressed." I laughed. She did too. And in that moment, the whole afternoon felt like something other than what it had started as. Not a professional visit with a hospitable outcome. Something warmer than that. Something I had not been looking for when I turned down that gravel drive. I stopped by my truck. "I'll call you by Thursday with the documentation list and the question about the refinancing. I'll have the income records ready." She crossed her arms lightly, not defensively, just the way people stand when they're finishing a conversation and the wind has picked up. "You do this every day, drive out to people's houses and deliver bad news?" "Sometimes I deliver options," I said. "Is that better?" "Usually." She held my gaze for a second. "Thank you, Daniel." She had used my first name, I noticed that. I did not say anything about it. I drove back to the office with the radio on and the file open on the passenger seat and Sandra's voice from earlier sitting somewhere in the back of my head. You like her? I thought about the soup, the spoon wind chimes, the gray-green eyes, the way she had said I'm not helpless, Mr. Marsh, I'm just behind, like she had needed to establish that first before anything else. I thought about the fact that Marcus Calloway had walked away from a woman like that for reasons the file didn't explain and probably couldn't. I called Sandra when I got back to the parking lot. The refinancing question, I said when she picked up. I looked into it, she said. If she can demonstrate 12 months of sole operational income from the property after the legal abandonment is confirmed, we can consider the application under her name alone. It's not guaranteed, but it's a real path. Good, I said, a pause. Daniel, I know, I'm just saying. I know, Sandra, she let it go, she was decent like that. I called Nora on Wednesday with the documentation list 2 days before I had promised. I told myself it was because I had gotten the information early. That was not entirely a lie. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice had a different quality on the phone, less guarded somehow, like the distance made it easier to be direct. We talked about the documents for 7 minutes. Then she said, Ellie asked about you. I was not expecting that. She doesn't know me. I told her a man came about some paperwork and stayed for soup. She asked if you were nice. Nora paused. I said yes. My chest did the thing it had been doing since Tuesday afternoon, which was operate like it belonged to a 22-year-old who had never learned to be sensible. How old is she again? I asked. 8. She wants to know if you have kids. No, she'll be disappointed. There was warmth under that sentence. She's at the stage where she thinks every adult who doesn't have children is simply waiting to be adopted. I smiled in the empty parking lot of a commercial lending firm at 5:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. I'll try not to encourage that. Probably wise. A pause. The documents will be ready Friday. I can come by. You don't have to drive out. I could drop them at your office. I'll come by, I said. She was quiet for a beat. Then, okay, the 2 weeks between my call and the Friday visit were not nothing. I thought about Nora Calloway more than the file required. That was honest. I thought about the way she had organized her documents with sticky note tabs. The way she had said, I'm not helpless, Mr. Marsh, I'm just behind, with the particular steadiness of someone who had rehearsed that sentence in her head several times before saying it out loud, not because she was performing confidence, but because she had needed to locate it first. The way the child's drawing on the refrigerator had a sun in the corner with a face, which is the universal artistic signature of childhood and somehow the most hopeful thing I had seen all week. I also thought about Sandra saying you like her and me not answering. I had been in 2 serious relationships in my life. The first ended when I was 29 and the woman I was with took a job in Vancouver and we both pretended for 2 months that distance wouldn't matter until one day neither of us bothered to pretend anymore. The second was Caroline, the one who stopped reaching for my hand in small, slow ways before I knew it was happening. Both were decent people. Neither one ended badly. They just ended the way some things end, without a specific reason you can point to, which is somehow harder to carry than a reason would be. After Caroline, I had spent about 18 months being very sensible, focusing on work. Running in the mornings, making my apartment look like a person with a plan lived there. I had gone on a few dates that were perfectly fine in the way that fine is its own kind of disappointing. Nothing landed. And then I drove down a gravel road on a Tuesday with a clipboard, and a woman with dirt on her hands invited me in for soup. I was aware of the complications. I was not ignoring them. There was the professional dimension, which was real even if the account was moving through the system properly. There was the fact that her life was mid-crisis in a way that made the timing genuinely terrible. There was the 8-year-old, which was not a problem, not even close, but was something to take seriously in a way that deserved more than a few days of thought. But Sandra had said it and I had not answered, and the reason I had not answered was that it was true, and I was not in the habit of lying to people, even by omission, even when it would have been easier. I submitted the documents Monday. I called Nora Monday afternoon. Tuesday I ran into Sandra in the break room and she handed me a coffee and said, "Why did you flag it?" She looked at me directly. Personally, there must have been easier ways to handle this account. A phone call, a referral to the legal department. I thought about Sandra, you like her. I drove out here to understand the situation, I said, and when I understood it, it seemed like the right thing to do. She held my gaze. That's not a complete answer. It wasn't. No, I said. I guess it isn't. The afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at the low angle it gets in late afternoon, the kind of light that makes ordinary rooms feel like something worth painting. Ellie had disappeared again. Outside, the wind had picked up enough to make the spoon chimes move. Nora looked at the table between us. Then she said quietly, "Marcus used to look through me when he talked. Like he was working out something in his head while his mouth kept going." She wasn't performing this. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was simply saying something true in the way that people do when they have been carrying it long enough to set it down. "I got used to it. I didn't realize I had until you sat across from me Tuesday and actually looked." She paused. "That's what I wanted to thank you for, not the deferral, not the paperwork. The looking." My throat tightened in a way I was not going to comment on. "You deserved someone looking," I said. "That was all." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that happens when something cuts too close and the body doesn't know whether to laugh or cry and picks the third option. She stood to clear the cracker plate and I stood too, and for a second we were both just there in the same kitchen, close to the same counter, both pretending there was something neutral and practical happening. Then Ellie walked in holding the dinosaur up at eye level and said, "Mom, does Daniel want to see the chickens?" Nora looked at her daughter, then at me. "Do you want to see the chickens?" I put my folder in my bag. "I genuinely do," I said. The chickens were behind the barn in a large wire run that Ellie had named with a handwritten sign reading Chicken City, which she explained had a mayor, 2 deputy mayors, and 1 resident who was simply called Problem. Problem was a large, opinionated Rhode Island Red who watched me from across the run with the expression of someone who had made an assessment and found it wanting. "Why Problem?" I asked. "She escaped 4 times, Ellie said gravely. "Once she got all the way to the road." "Bold, very bold." Ellie crouched by the wire. "She's also the best layer, so Mom says we have to respect her choices." I looked at Nora. She was leaning against the side of the barn with her arms crossed and the early evening light on her face, watching her daughter explain chicken politics with the fond patience of someone who has heard this particular explanation many times and has not gotten tired of it yet. She caught me looking. She didn't look away immediately. She let it sit for half a second, which was longer than she needed to, and then she looked back at Ellie with a different quality to her expression, something she was thinking about. Ellie stood up. "I'm going to get the feed," she announced, and ran to the small shed at the corner of the run with the single-mindedness of someone with a mission. Nora and I were briefly alone. "She's remarkable," I said. "She's 8 and she's already better at most things than I was at 30, Nora smiled, "which is either a parenting success or deeply humbling." "Both, probably." "Both," she agreed. Ellie came back with a small bucket of feed and began tossing it through the wire with great ceremony, narrating the feeding preferences of each chicken for my benefit. Problem ignored the food and continued staring at me. "She doesn't like new people," Ellie explained. "I'm told I grow on people," I said. Ellie considered this. "Maybe chickens, too." There was a fence post on the east side of the property that was leaning at an angle serious enough to be an actual problem and not just aesthetic. I noticed it while Ellie was narrating the feeding. I mentioned it to Nora. She looked at it and said she had been watching it for 2 weeks and hadn't decided whether it was worth hiring someone for or whether she could brace it herself. "I can look at it before I go," I said. She looked at me. "You don't have to." "I know." She handed me a post driver from the barn without making a speech about it. That was the thing I kept noticing. Nora didn't make speeches out of things. She didn't perform gratitude or perform self-sufficiency. She just figured out what the situation needed and moved accordingly, and if someone else was there and capable and willing, she let them be useful without turning it into a whole event. That sounds simple. It wasn't. I had known people who made every act of help into something that had to be narrated and processed and reflected back. Nora just handed you the post driver. I fixed the fence post. It took maybe 20 minutes. Ellie supervised from a safe distance and offered commentary. Nora brought water and sat on an overturned bucket nearby, reading something on her phone in the serious way of someone working through a document, not scrolling. When I finished and packed the tools, she looked up and said, "That was holding things together by stubbornness alone." "Most things that last are," I said. She looked at me for a second, then looked back at her phone. "You might be right." When it was time to go, I walked back to my truck across the gravel while the light turned the long way into gold and the wind settled into something easier. Ellie had gone in, called by Nora with the specific tone of homework before dinner that I remembered from my own childhood. The yard was quiet in the way that farms get quiet in the early evening, full of small sounds and nothing pressing. Nora walked me to my truck. She did not have to. It was the second time she had done it. At the truck, I turned around. She was standing with one hand in her pocket and the other at her side, and her hair had come loose from the part she had pinned earlier, so it was just down, which made her look less like someone managing a difficult situation and more like someone who was simply herself on an evening in spring. "I'll call you when I submit the file Monday," I said. "You don't have to call," she said. "An email is fine." "I'll call," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Daniel, I need to say something." "Okay, I am in the middle of something messy." She held my gaze steady as always. "I have a legal situation, a farm I'm holding together on my own, and an 8-year-old who thinks you may want to be adopted." Her mouth moved slightly. "And I am aware that you are a professional who came out here to do a job and has been, by any measure, very good at it." She paused. "I'm not asking you for anything." "I know," I said. "I'm just telling you that when you called Wednesday, I picked up on the second ring because I had been hoping you would call." She said it the way she said everything. Direct, unhurried, honest without being dramatic. And that is probably information you didn't need, but it seemed more honest than pretending Tuesday was just soup. My heart was doing something it had not done in a long time. Not racing, not lurching, something quieter, the way a compass settles. "Tuesday was not just soup," I said. She smiled, the real one, the small, sharp one that changed her whole face. "No," she said. "It wasn't." I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and the window cracked and the kind of feeling in my chest that you don't usually get from doing your job. I submitted the file Monday morning. Sandra reviewed it herself, which was not standard, and called me that afternoon to say it had been fast-tracked to the hardship committee and looked favorable. I called Nora. She picked up on the first ring, and I didn't say anything about it, and neither did she. We talked about the file. Then, after we had covered everything practical, we kept talking. She told me about the West Field, which had a drainage problem she was trying to decide whether to fix herself or call someone for. I told her about a project I was managing for a company property in her county, a rehab on a commercial building that had better bones than the inspection had suggested. She said that sounded familiar. I said I thought she'd say that. At the end of the call, she said, "Ellie wants to know if you're coming back on Friday." "Is Friday a work day for the farm?" "Every day is a work day on the farm." "Then I could help," I said. "If that's useful." A pause, not uncertain, careful. "That would not be professional." "No," I said, "it wouldn't." Another pause. "Friday," she said. The third Friday, she was in the barn when I arrived, not the house. I could hear the particular kind of frustrated quiet that means someone has been working on something alone for too long and is trying not to admit it is beating them. One of the irrigation connectors on the smaller system had stripped. The kind of fitting that requires either a specific replacement part or the patience of someone who can work with pliers at an angle that makes your wrist ache. She had the replacement part. She did not have 3 hands. I crouched beside her in the dim light of the barn and held the fitting steady while she worked the wrench. Neither of us talked for most of it. The radio in the barn was playing something old and unhurried from a station that apparently lived in 1974. Ellie was at school. The barn smelled like straw and machine oil and the particular clean dust smell of old wood that has been in weather for decades. At one point, Nora's hand slipped and the wrench caught the back of my knuckle. She said, "Sorry, it's fine. It's bleeding." I looked. It was slightly bleeding. "It's barely bleeding." "There's a first aid kit in the cabinet." She was already standing up. "Nora, it's not worth." "Sit," she said, not unkindly, just firmly. I sat on the barn step while she found the kit. She cleaned the cut with the efficient focus of someone who had handled enough actual farm injuries not to be dramatic about minor ones. She put a bandage on it. Her hands were steady and practical and close, and I was very aware of being this close to her in the quiet of the barn and doing an excellent job of looking at my own hand instead of her face. "You're good at this," I said. "I have an 8-year-old, she said. "I have patched knees and elbows and one memorable forehead." "What happened to the forehead?" "Tree climbing went wrong in a very specific way." She peeled the backing off the bandage carefully. "She was fine." I, however, aged approximately 4 years in 30 seconds. I laughed. She did too. After a moment, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She pressed the bandage flat with her thumb. "What does your regular life look like? Not the job, the rest of it." I thought about this. "I run in the mornings. I have an apartment that is too clean because I am not there enough to make it interesting. I call my mother on Sundays, which she considers insufficient, and I consider heroic given the length of those calls." I paused. "I read a lot. I cook when I have reason to." Mostly I don't. She sat back on her heels and looked at me. When you say you don't have reason to, cooking for one gets repetitive, I said. You stop putting effort into it. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I cook too much every night. I make things in quantities designed for more people than are here. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't have to. I went back Friday, and the Friday after that. Not as a lending agent, not on official time, just as a person who had driven down a gravel road expecting paperwork and found something he had not been looking for and could not quite talk himself out of. The hardship deferral came through in 3 weeks. The committee had flagged it as a priority case. Nora called me when she got the letter, and her voice had the quality of someone who has been holding something above their head for a long time and has finally been allowed to put it down. Thank you, she said. I submitted a file, I said. You built a case. Daniel, Nora, don't do the thing where you minimize what you did. Don't do the thing where you give me credit that belongs to you, she laughed. We're both doing it. We are both doing it, I agreed. Ellie in the background shouted that problem had escaped again. Nora said she had to go. I sat in my car for a minute after she hung up and thought about the way a person can drive somewhere expecting a simple outcome and end up somewhere entirely different than where they started. Not lost, just not where the map said. That was the thing about the Callaway account. The file said it was about a tractor and an irrigation system and a man who had stopped paying his bills. It turned out to be about a woman who had been holding a farm and a child and her own dignity together by herself for 7 weeks, and had answered the door with dirt on her hands and offered soup to the person sent to take things from her because that was simply the kind of person she was. It turned out to be about the fact that some people move through hard things without losing their warmth. And that warmth, the real kind, the kind that doesn't perform and doesn't ask for applause, is the rarest thing I know. The loan was eventually refinanced under Nora's name. It took 9 months, a completed legal filing, and a lot of patience. Sandra walked the application through personally, which she told me was because it was the right outcome for the company's risk exposure, and absolutely not because she had made her opinion of my feelings on the matter clear since week 2. I told her the company was lucky to have her. She told me to go fix the drainage problem in the West Field. I did. Marcus resurfaced eventually, not to Nora, to his attorney, and then to hers. The legal process was what it was. Slow, impersonal, and ultimately final. Nora moved through it with the same practical steadiness she had brought to everything else. She didn't hate him loudly. She didn't eulogize the marriage in every conversation. She just kept going, and she let herself be helped along the way, which was its own kind of bravery. Ellie stopped asking if I wanted to be adopted somewhere around month 4, when the question shifted on its own to something she asked differently. Not out loud, just in the way she started saving me the chair with the best view of Chicken City. Problem never fully warmed up to me. I respected her for it. The first time Nora and I sat on her porch together, not because there was work to discuss, but simply because neither of us had anywhere else we wanted to be. It was an evening in late summer with the last of the light going warm and low across the fields. She had a glass of iced tea. I had coffee. The spoon chimes moved. Ellie was inside doing something that involved colored pencils and what she described as a very important map. Nora said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "The fact that you could have just sent a letter," she looked at the fence line, "or called a lawyer, handed the file to someone else. Any of it would have been easier." "Probably," I said. "But you drove out here." "I drove out here." She looked at me. "Why?" I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "I think," I said slowly, "that I was tired of the version of the job where people were just accounts. Where the outcome was the only thing that mattered and the situation behind it didn't." I looked at the fields in the last of the light. "And I think you opened a door expecting someone who wanted to make it fast and easy, and I didn't want to be that person." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You weren't." The summer went long that year. The drainage problem in the West Field turned out to be fixable with 3 weekends and the right equipment. Problem laid 17 eggs in August, and Ellie declared it a record. The refinancing closed on a Tuesday in October. Nora called me from the driveway of the bank, and I could hear the wind in the background, and her voice had something new in it, something that sounded like ground under her feet. That evening, she made soup again. I stayed for dinner. Ellie fell asleep on the couch holding the dinosaur and Nora, and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet that comes after an 8-year-old has finally stopped generating noise, and I thought about the clipboard I had brought to this house 7 months ago. The file, the straightforward job I had been sent to do. Nora reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Some things don't need sentences. They've already been said in 100 small, ordinary ways in Soup and Documents and Honest Answers and Friday Afternoons, and the particular way a person reaches for your hand not because anything dramatic is happening, but because they want to and they've decided to stop pretending otherwise. I turned my hand over and held hers back. Outside, the wind chimes moved. Problem, I was told later by Ellie, had stopped staring at me by then. High praise, all things considered. Have you ever driven somewhere expecting one outcome and walked away with something entirely different? Have you ever had someone offer you ordinary kindness in a moment when you expected none of it and felt the whole shape of something change? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.